All right, so next up, we have kind of a combination of things. It's calibrations and sequencing and terminology and difference between the regulations and stuff like that. So it's going to kind of be a combination between Reggie from the environmental side of things and the regulatory side of things, and Clif from the PLC side of things and how it's programmed into the software in the PLCs. So take it away. You already have one. You can use his. We'll use this for customers.
I see how it works, Reggie. You wrote me into it, and then it. All right. Yeah, that's you doing that. Okay, let's see. All right. This presentation is to try and describe and hopefully answer any questions you might have about calibration checks. And I'm Clif Petersen, Senior PLC Specialist, and my partner in crime for this would be Reggie Williams, who's an environmental scientist. Okay, first thing that I was supposed to discuss is how an hour is validated. And this is important when you're thinking about doing any kind of checks, the calibration, or doing any maintenance on the system. And I'd recommend that all of your technicians get trained to keep this in mind when they're doing stuff with the CIMS, because it can cost you a lot of downtime if you don't pay attention to it. So the hour is considered with the 4 15-minute quadrants. And a valid hour is either one valid read in each of the quadrants, or during hours of cal or maintenance, you just need 2 valid reads at least 15 minutes apart. The gentleman from the EPA said in 2 different quadrants, well, it's kind of impossible to have the 15-minute apart reads in the same quadrant. So that pretty well defines it. And like I say, to minimize downtime, you need to pay attention to when you're doing maintenance or when you're starting a cow. If you want to do something with the system, you can always kind of give yourself a little hedge if you wait a little after the top of the hour, or a little after the, say, 16 minutes or 17 minutes into the hour, et cetera, et cetera. So you want, your target is here, just a little bit after each quadrant. You're starting a maintenance period or starting a calibration. And what that did is that quadrant's already valid. So you can go ahead and burn the whole rest of the quadrant and then work your way into the next quadrant. And if your maintenance is done before you get to the end of that second quadrant, boom, you've got a valid hour even though you did maintenance. Another statement schedule long tests such as linearities to go across the top of the hour. Because am I right that it doesn't matter, you can get more than 1 hour of cal maintenance in a row, correct? That's what I thought. So basically, if you started doing your maintenance right here in the first hour, this hour is valid because it has 2 valid reads 15 minutes apart. Now you can go across the top of the hour, and if you finish your maintenance before you've bitten into this second hour enough to where you can't get 2 valid reads 15 minutes apart, you still haven't negated any of these or invalidated any of these hours because of your maintenance period. So, like I say, it's really, if you're continually struggling with downtime issues, train your technicians to look at this, and it'll really help you out. Okay, the next thing I want to say, and both of these topics. I'm going to go ahead and show it here. Calibration timing and settings and the sequencing of the calibration gases. They kind of need to be talked about together. Because of the EPA rule regulations, you have to start your calibration gas as close to the tip of the probe as practical. For CiSCO's purposes, we inject it right here in the probe where the straw extension is attached to the probe. So that forces the calibration gas to come through the filter and down through any of the sample handling, and then gets to the analyzer. And it's pretty much as close to the tip of the probe for our probe purposes as you can practically inject it. And it does one other thing is, years and years ago, CiSCO used to put the calibration gas in on what I call the clean side of the filter. And you could literally pass a calibration with a leaky probe. So they've changed their methodology and put it in on the dirty side of the filter. It doesn't matter how much calibration pressure you put up there, it ain't gonna mask a leak. Okay? So your timing relates to how long it takes this calibration gas to get up the calibration line, get into the probe, come back down the sample line, and come over here and actually fill the analyzer. There's a time there. You can't make it any shorter than the nature, their physics requires. You can increase the flows, and that'll increase it a little bit. But on the other hand, you're also spending calibration gas. So it's kind of a balance, you know. How quick do we want this calibration to happen? How often do we want to change our cylinders for our daily cows? So there's a balance point on that. And so the timing is primarily based on how long it takes the gas to go through the system and fill the analyzer so that you can get a stable reading of the gas. One of the other things that plays into it is we've had very poor luck starting with a high concentration for an analyzer and then going to a low concentration. Just having good results from the calibration. Yeah, failing calibrations. Yes. Yeah, there's problems with that too, and I wanted to speak about it later. But you're right. But the problem with the high concentration followed by the low concentration is the CO analyzers and the NOx analyzers seem to want to hang on to that gas. And so getting your zero after you put in a high concentration of CO on your CO analyzer is a lot harder than just starting with where you were with the stack and going to zero. On our older systems, I don't think you can read this very good, but you've got a nitrogen cylinder, and then you have a CO and a NOx cylinder, and then you have instrument air that is used. This is a really old system. We don't build them like exactly like that anymore. They're real similar, but there's different philosophy on it.
Clif, did you
Pardon me?
do you want me to zoom in?
Oh, no, you're fine. So what we would do is we'd start with the nitrogen. Everybody go to zero, including the NOx, the CO, O2. All the analyzers got their zero off of that nitrogen. And then they would run what I call the pollutant gases, the NOx and the CO, and get whatever ranges we had for those, starting with the low range and working to the high range. And then we'd end up with the instrument air / O2 cylinder, whichever you have. And the reason for that is, while some analyzers have trouble going from a high concentration to a low concentration, the O2 analyzers we use do not have this problem. Usually, if you watch your O2 analyzer, it'll move from one point to another in just a minute and a half, 2 minutes. It's good, it's stable, it's done, and you can get a good read on it. So we'd follow up after we'd injected all these gases. We'd follow up with the O2 span. It did the thing you're talking about, Dave. It's cleared the sample line out, or sorry, the calibration line out of the calibration gas. So it's instrument air or ambient air in there now, and cleared the sample system back to basically ambient conditions. So, but it becomes a challenge when you start going into the more modern philosophies where you use one cylinder to zero, say you use O2 cylinder to zero the NOx CO analyzers, and you say use the NOx analyzer to zero the O2 analyzer. So you only have 3 cylinders instead of these 4 cylinders that you would have on this system. You don't really need the nitrogen. There's no reason to have it. So a lot of people have started just doing that. That's the way they do it. And on most of those systems, we start with the O2 span, and that zeros the CO and the NOx analyzer. But unfortunately, we are ending with NOx or we are ending with CO. So a lot of our engineers have started putting what we call a purge valve into the system, where we're literally going back to the instrument air at the end of cal. We turn that purge valve on for a minute or two and blow the system out with ambient air and get rid of the residual gases. If you don't have those purge valves available in your system, you might think about trying to figure out how to put them in there. We'll be more than happy to help you program them into the calibration. I'm done with my part of this. We're going to move on to more regulatory requirements in that. Is there any questions? Okay, stop them up for you. Okay. Usually a setting that's right down there in the cell turn.
We were supposed to wear straw hats and have canes and do a show, but Clif didn't wear his stuff. So basically what we're gonna do here is I just want to go through the drift stuff, the scenarios regulatory wise, because one of the biggest issues obviously is the differences between 60 and 75. And I think we have a lot more information, especially for this presentation, because we've, in the last several months, our department, we've interacted with the EPA, the different groups, the Part 60 and the Part 75 group, to address certain scenarios that we didn't have before. Because like I said in the last presentation, we're trying to be a little more proactive with certain events rather than try to address them after the fact. And so we have our meetings and we discuss scenarios, or one of you bring up a scenario that we haven't anticipated. And so one of the things we're going to, as we go through this, we're kind of go back and address those issues where 60 has addressed the issue now. And so we can provide you guys with information. So the first issue is time of doing a calibration. Both of 75 and 60 in general talk about you want to have your calibrations about 24 hours apart. Obviously, Part 75 gives you kind of a 2-hour grace period. So you have 26 clock hours or 26 unit operating hours, depending on it, if you're using offline calibrations, which we'll get into as we move along. If you don't operate a lot and you're not able to do your calibrations every 26 clock hours, and you find that you haven't been operating a lot, when you come up under Part 75, you have this option of a 8-hour grace period. And so it's just the generic idea of the time involved between the two different regulations. Late expired cows. For 7-day drift, both regulations require you to have 7 unit operating days, 7 calendar days. Part 60 has always emphasized 7 calendar days, but they also have had unit operating days. So the language for both of them are basically the same. So that you have to have your 7-day drift for the 7-day. For the 7-day drift, you have to be 7 unit operating days or 7 calendar days, but the unit has to be operating. One of the things is, for daily, one of the things is Part 60 allows you to do offline cows. So sometimes you guys might ask, hey, can we use offline cow for the 7-day drift? Part 60 doesn't explicitly say you can't, but the language is that the unit is operating. And so the only time you can use the offline cows for 7-day or for Part 60 is for daily calibration. For daily calibrations, you'll note that if a test is late, it's not addressed. So for example, what to do if you ran a calibration 24 hours expires, what does Part 60 say to do on the matter? It doesn't make any statement on. Part 75 makes it clear if calibration expires, the data starts to be invalidated. And so as we go along, I'm going to kind of address this a little further on, but generically, the reason why I have that EPA versus state is because now we have information from the, based on the state, that slide I showed you guys yesterday regarding the various states and agencies we've contacted. Now we at least have a general guidance from different states how they want to handle it. But in general, you want to be doing calibrations every 24 hours under 60 so you don't have to address that issue. Fail limits for 7-day drift. For 7-day drift and for 60 and 75, it's one time the performance spec or the performance spec for both. Part 75 gives you an option of a mean difference. One of the things, we'll get to that in the next slides. For daily calibrations, you get 2 times the performance spec. If you fail 2 times the performance spec 5 days in a row, it's like then the data becomes invalid forward. So the next hour after that 5th day, you start invalidating forward. Similar with Part 75, soon as you fail a calibration, you invalidate forward. Part 60 adds that nice little caveat, or I'm sorry, if you go back to the higher one, if you fail 2 times the performance spec once, I think we acknowledge it as a warning, correct? It's simply a warning. And we used to call it a fail, so it would excite someone to take action to fix the issue. But people started to worry, is our data invalid? They were over panicking, so we changed the wording so that it says warning now. But if you fail that 2 times, 5 times in a row, it becomes an out of control. The 4 times, as I mentioned yesterday in my presentation, that's the big one because it invalidates backwards to the next passing cow. And once again, I'll just remind you don't want to have a valuable test in between those 2 calibrations, or especially if your source test has left the building, then you invited a whole additional set of problems. 5 days. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. Yeah, you're correct. Unless you do 5 times 5 days. Anyway. Yeah. Operational status for 7-day drift test. The unit has to be online, basically combusting fuel. 75, same thing online. Under 75, if you have a span that's less than 50 ppm, you're exempt from the 7-day drift test. And we're going to address that issue regarding 7-day drift test on a different slide. For daily operations, for daily calibrations, online and offline calibrations, online and offline calibrations can be used for both. The difference is under 60, you can use an offline calibration without doing anything extra. Under 75, you do what's called an online-offline determination test. And this is a one-time test you do, and it lasts forever until you change out the analyzer. For those of you who have had us involved with your certification, we typically generate this for you as part of certification because we're already looking at data. It's like during the testing period, so it's no big deal for us to just go ahead and add that to it so that you have it. And then whether you use the offline cows or not, that's your business. But one of the beauties of that is if you run into an issue where you didn't do an online calibration, it's like if you have that in your Breeze folder, the software will do it on its own. If you don't have it in your Breeze folder, put it in your Breeze folder, and then the software will do it on its own. That simple. And when I say Breeze folder, do most of you know what I mean? Probably not. I'm going to define it anyway. Our software has, would it be fair to say a sub-software that does EDRs? And so it stores particular ECMPS files, the XML format files, soon to be a JSON file. It stores, and that software looks at those files and tells how to generate the EDR and how to look at the data. So if you don't have an offline, online determination, my question is, why not? There's no downside. So if that's something you're interested in, you need us to walk you through it or something, just give me or my team a call. There's no downside to having that in there. You don't have to use it, but if you do want to use it, it's available.
Most situations we're having offline demonstration.
Yeah.
No situation where.
No situation. See, you should award a straw hat in the cane and we could. Clif, you're fired. Anyway, no. Dual range analyzers. This is one of the big issues that we've just been addressing with the EPA. Because one of the things is Part 75 says if you fail on any range during calibration, the analyzer is out of control and you have to invalidate data. And as I indicated in the slide before, where even on the 7-day drift test, where if you have an analyzer less than 50 ppm and you happen to fail the low range, which is exempt from 7-day drift, that 7-day drift starts over. So this is the guidance that the EPA has given us regarding Part 75. Even if you have an exempt analyzer and that low range fails out of control, in other words, it doesn't meet the 2.5 or the 5 ppm mean difference. If we're not passing the 5 ppm mean difference, there's a bigger issue. But just in case, we've had the problem, just in case, you can't presume just because you pass the high range that you're good for 7-day drift, or you're going to run into one of those issues I brought up yesterday where you're going to find yourself, you haven't passed your certification when you thought you did. On the other hand, Part 60 Part 60 historically hasn't addressed the issue. And so we've gotten clarification from them, and like I indicated in my presentation yesterday, because EPA views the analyzer, since it has one detector for both ranges, if you go out of control for one range, they consider it out of range. And so the guidance that the EPA has given us for 60 as well is the same as 75. If you fail on daily calibration, if you fail on 7-day drift test on one of the ranges, both ranges are invalid. How about clicking the right button? Calibration drift gas concentrations, both. So for 60, it's like the calibration limits, you have the range of 50 to 100% for daily calibration. So sometimes when you find yourself running short on gas, if your mid-range gas for your CGAs works, you can use that. 75 gives you the notice in for, ooh, that 0 is supposed to be, that's not the right 0. It should be 0 to 20. Wow, I did it twice. I'm consistent. So both of those are supposed to be, yeah. Consistency. I'm either consistently right or I'm consistently wrong. So so 0 to like I said, for the calibration gas on the higher end, regardless of the zeros, the high for part 60 is a straight 50 all the way to 100%. Part 75 allows you to use the mid-range for your daily calibrations, but the wording is, however you want, is as much as it represents the stack concentration kind of thing. But the EPA has never shown any exception to using it just as normal calibration regardless. And so the only distinction is that, 61 to 79% gap there. But it does afford you, like I said, you run out of calibration gas, you can always grab your mid-range linearity gas and use that for calibration. And then instrument error, part 60 doesn't address it. And I've looked in the determinations, and the determinations are basically power plants write different agencies and they say, can we do this X, Y, and Z? And the EPA responds, yeah, we'll accept that you do this X, Y, and Z. Or they'll say, no, because we don't believe it meets the technical requirements, kind of like what Charlie was saying yesterday when we were talking about the Coriolis stuff and using NIST traceability stuff. But part 75 says it's allowed, but you must demonstrate clean of O2. Oh, it's clean of O2 interference. And basically, the only interferent that has significant thing is if you have a 500 ppm NOx as part of your instrument error. That's the only thing that's in the table we've reviewed that shows it can cause it. So basically most instrument error, but how do you demonstrate that fact? We have one of the methods that we kind of use to demonstrate is if when you're doing other tests using like O2, if you're using O2 as a 0 gas and it has no impact on your NOx value, you're not seeing any NOx reading. It shows there's not enough NOx in there. There's not 500 ppm of NOx in your instrument air. So there isn't any standard. Matter of fact, I've even talked to Charlie and others about this, and no one's provided guidance. So I believe if you do the best QA of your instrument, because in the policy manual, technical Q&A manual now, it indicates it's like the vendor's supposed to supply you with some kind of indication that there's no interference, but what vendor has provided any of you with a letter that there's no interference in there. So I think the best you can do is QA your do whatever QA you think the system is working properly, and you could,
Wouldn't that be a standard?
but you're paying for something that's, and you're doing it regularly.
15 minutes.
Yeah, and I think until the EPA or someone says otherwise, just using it as a zero gas or running it through, because you do all these tests where you use the O2 or the instrument air for stuff. It easily makes the case because, like I said, if you look at the literature, there's only certain parameters that work as an interference against that, and you're never going to reach those capacities in my view, but I guess you could. So Clif gives you another option. You're back on the team. And so, but like I say, Part 60 doesn't address the issue anywhere. They don't in any of their letters of determination. So when we find out something, we'll share it with you guys. Yeah. Yeah, and that's exactly what I was saying. It's like, and what I was suggesting, like you said, because all you have to demonstrate is that there's no clear interference in I like for me, my personal assessment would be it's just whatever your site wants to do as QA, I would figure it as a or at least a once a year kind of thing. At best, it's not something you're going to be doing ongoing because you're not going to be addressing your instrument air kind of system on a daily basis. But I would say basically once a year would be more than enough, and I wouldn't even think more about it. Non-test errors, example, calibrating with cylinder turned off. This is the one that got scary for us. Talked to Kim Garnett at the EPA, and we had dealt with the Part 75 EPA many times. And one of the questions we asked them, hey, we ran a calibration, they didn't turn the cylinder on, or some other non-CIMS issue, and they told us it's a non-test, don't even report it. It's like it shouldn't count against anything. And we felt pretty confident with that because that made sense. And like I said yesterday, we had the presumption, it wasn't based on Part 60 regulation, it was based on our own presumption of, hey, that just seems right. So we contacted Part 60, and Kim Garnett informed us in that kind of scenario, you would consider the CIMS is out of control and it would need to be recertified. And so we said, but the gas wasn't on. And she said, we don't care. And so she didn't say that, but I felt it. Anyway, but remember, as we talked about yesterday, she also made the declaration that each state has its own decision to make on this matter. And so that's where we had the EPA versus the state, just depending on what your state says. And most states will, even despite the project we've been working on, will acknowledge that if the gas wasn't on, you didn't give the CIMS a fair opportunity. But there are states that we're still kind of equivocating over the fact that, hey, it's like we don't know what to do. And so that's where it goes back to that statement I made yesterday. You ask the question in a way you want them to answer. Here's what we're allowed to do for Part 75, and then ask that way so you don't give them wiggle room to come up with an answer. And that's it. Any questions? Sweet. Okay, thank you guys.